everyone. Welcome to Day 3 of AlterCOP 30 Australia on biodiversity, bioeconomy, and nature-based solutions. I'd like to begin by inviting Cameron Costello, traditional owners from the Quadamungka community in Moreton Bay, to deliver the acknowledgement of country. Thank you, Cameron.
Yura, everyone. Yura, that's hello in our language. So Yura. Yura. My name's Cameron Costello. I'm a Quandamooka man of the Ngugi, Nunakal and Gurrumpul peoples of Moreton Bay, so Bayside, Brisbane. My family has been there for many, many generations, going back tens of thousands of years, which kind of spins me out a little bit as well. But it's a real pleasure to be here today for this really important forum. And I'll reflect on it about what we do as First Nations people and how we've been operating in terms of nature-positive economies for tens of thousands of years. And there's lots that we can share and learn from each other around that. It's a really important moment in time in history for us, collectively, to come together on those things. So it's really important that we're here together, and it's great for me to be here and honoured to do the acknowledgement of country. And one of the important things for First Nations people is obviously language. And so I'd like to deliver the acknowledgement of country in our Jundai language and to do our acknowledgement. So I'll say that Nagari Ninda Murumbiari Ngali Niba Wunjai Gurjan Jarjan Gulablabu Yanigu Yagara Turubu, which means me and you, good talk or acknowledge that our sit-down place here today is on the lands forever walked by the Yagara and Turrbal peoples, our neighbouring clans for the Quandamooka people, and we pay our respects to their elders past and present, and also acknowledge any other First Nations people here or online, and look forward to that engagement, that conversation and outcomes for a better planet through engagement with First Nations people. We're the home, Queensland's fortunate to be the home of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures that have been here for the oldest living cultures on Earth. And hopefully we can work with everybody to create a better planet for our future. And I'd like to finish off by quoting from Ani Udjuru Nunakal, Ani Kath Walker, who was a Quandamooka woman and a well-known poet for Australia. And her Song of Hope, it's got a line next to our fathers' fathers, the pain, the sorrow, to our children's children, a glad tomorrow. And so I look forward to creating a glad tomorrow for all of our children, no matter what race. We're all there for our sustainable for our children's children, and look forward to walking and working with you in that regard. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cameron. Now, I would like to introduce you to Professor Brendan Mackay, Director of the Climate Action Beacon at Griffith University, who is currently attending COP in Belém, Brazil. Brendan has kindly recorded a message for us with an update on what's happening over there. So let's listen to Brendan.
Good morning from Belém in the state of Para in Brazil, where I'm giving a very brief update on the Climate COP30 negotiations and related matters. In addition to the formal negotiation proceedings, as is typical, there's a very large civil society presence, including in the green zone, which is open to the public, where there's an incredible, diverse and rich presence of many, many civil society organisations, public good and also for-profit. There's a massive presence outside the formal green and blue zones, the blue zone being the government negotiating zone, including a huge march, peaceful march by about, I think I read 60,000 people. And of course Belém is near the Amazon, so there's an incredible presence of indigenous tribal people and communities and local communities, Quilombola communities from the Amazon region and in fact across all of Brazil. The formal negotiation process, as always, is very tense, terse and difficult and complex. On the list there is a list of the formal agenda items that are being negotiated, and on the right-hand side you can see a traffic light system showing you that only about a third of them have been completed and the text agreed to. So there's an incredible amount of work left to be done by the diplomats and delegates and negotiators over the coming week. Of course, civil society here is in great numbers too, and that expands everyone from the Climate Action Network International. Every country like Australia, as I'm sure everyone listening to this knows, is the way in which environmental and social justice groups are coordinated and have input into the negotiation process by talking to delegates and providing them with evidence and arguments as to why certain decisions should be made in certain ways. At the other end, of course, there's a very large number of fossil fuel industry representatives, if you like, arguing the other side of the coin. Three key outcomes to watch for, in addition or parallel and wrapped around this formal negotiating agenda, are roadmaps, which is a mechanism being proposed by the Brazil COP presidency as a way of progressing past decisions that COPs have made but have yet to be implemented. And these are called roadmaps. So they're roadmaps which will map out commitments and mechanisms and ways by which these decisions can be implemented. Of course, this COP is meant to be the COP of implementation. One of those is a roadmap for phasing out fossil fuels. Some of you may recall that at the Dubai COP in COP 28, 2 years ago, there was a decision to phase out fossil fuels. It was the first time this had been mentioned at a climate COP. And so now the proposal is that we have a roadmap for actually delivering on that decision. The second is a finance roadmap. The main means of implementation and a barrier to implementation of climate action is finance, particularly for the developing world, so a roadmap is urgently needed for that. And a forest roadmap. There have been commitments dating back to Glasgow to end deforestation and forest degradation, but there has been little progress within the COP process, climate COP process. So as the Panama head of delegation said yesterday, if we can't get a forest roadmap, if we cannot get a forest roadmap here in the Amazon, will we ever get one? So to me, in addition to the formal negotiating points that I showed on the previous slide, I think there's great prospects, and I would say hope, that we will get those three roadmaps as major outcomes of COP30 here in Belém. Thank you.
So Brendan recorded this video yesterday, so it will be very interesting to know in the next few days until COP ends if these roadmaps have been established and agreed on. My name is Fanny de Busserol. I'm one of the co-founder and the Chief Program Officer at People for Nature. We are a charitable social enterprise dedicated to empowering all Australians to protect biodiversity and build climate resilience. And we do that through education, citizen conservation, and citizen science, using a head, heart, and hand approach. And you'll have a chance later on during this session to experience one of our educational workshops. And People for Nature also took on this year the ambitious task of bringing AlterCOP to Australia. So what is AlterCOP? It was co-founded by the Matcha initiative and the Transmutation principle in Singapore. And it is the remote, community-led alternative to COP30 in Belém. It keeps people connected to global climate discussions and spark meaningful local conversation without the need to travel across the world. This year, AlterCOP is running in 12 different countries. And this is the first year in Australia and only the second year in the entire world that AlterCOP is happening. So thank you very much for being part of this really monumental piece of history. But AlterCOP is more than an alternative. It's a grassroots climate summit that brings together diverse communities to explore climate justice, decarbonization, biodiversity, and resilience. It's an inclusive, science-based platform for local climate action. And while the official COP discussions overseas can feel sometimes distant or frustrating, AlterCOP offers really a local, hopeful alternative that is grounded in shared values: inclusivity, community-centered, free, volunteer-led, and independent. At AlterCOP, we are committed to walking the talk from day one, with a no-flight policy, zero-waste efforts, vegetarian catering, and a focus on local sustainability through dialogue and action. Our aim is really to bring a positive, inspiring energy and a shared determination to move toward a net zero, nature-positive world. AlterCOP Australia is a 4-day event running alongside COP, and today mark day 3. So we still have tomorrow, day 4. We have some tickets. If you would like to take part of day 4, feel free to grab some ticket at the registration desk later on. So as I said, AlterCOP is a fully volunteer-powered event. And we would like to really express our deepest gratitude to the incredible team who brought these 4-day summits to life here in Australia, but also here in Brisbane, but also around Australia. And as well to all these amazing purple people that you see in the room, our volunteers here today and over the 4 days that have dedicated their time and energy to make this 4-day summit a success. Thank you. This event would have not been possible without the generous support of our partners. Advance Queensland, who is providing this beautiful venue. SAP, who is our blue partner and is supporting several AlterCOP events in Asia Pacific. And our day partner, our green partner for today, CO2 Australia. And thank you very much. We are very lucky to have several people from CO2 Australia taking part of the session and the discussion today. Thank you for your commitment and your help bringing this day forward. I would also like to thank all our collaborators. We have over 68 organizations contributing to AlterCOP this year. And in particular for today's session, I would like to acknowledge the Biodiversity Collage for their contribution. Now, it is my absolute pleasure to introduce you to Dr. Michelle Ward, lecturer at Griffith University, who will deliver a keynote address on the state of biodiversity in Australia. Michelle uses remote sensing, economics, and political science to evaluate environmental threats and design co-effective conservation solutions. She leads cross-disciplinary research to embed integrity into the nature-positive agenda through advanced modeling, monitoring, and policy analysis. Please welcome Michelle Ward.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me today. My name is Michelle Ward. I'm from Griffith University and I work really closely with Brendan Mackey, who we just heard from. There we go. So humans have long studied Earth's biodiversity for 70,000 years here in Australia. We've been able to document about 2.1 million species so far, but we predict that there's about 7 to 8 million more species that remain undocumented. But even though we don't know everything, there are major gaps in our understanding on biodiversity, we know that it is incredibly important. So biodiversity underpins our food security, from soil microbes that maintain nutrient cycles to our pollinators, which enable the reproduction of, this is not working. Where do I point? Here? Maybe I'll just use the keyboard. there we go, sorry about that, which enable the reproduction of 3/4 of the world's major food crops and fish that feed billions of people. So many medicines, like this penicillium fungi, originate from our plants and fungi, like penicillin. We know that vegetation reduces flood risk, while corals and mangroves buffer storms, and we know that healthy ecosystems regulate a stable climate. Despite its critical importance, humans are destroying nature. So we know from using remote sensing technology, so satellites out of space taking pictures of Earth, more than 50% of our land has been moderately or severely altered. And some of those ecosystems that have been really modified are things like our temperate grasslands, which are easy to graze, easy to grow agriculture and food. So the biggest drivers of land use change are things like logging, urban development and agriculture. So we know that from 2000 to 2019, about 90% of global deforestation was attributable to crops and pasture land expansion. And this is having massive impact on our plants and animals. So you can see here, these are the biggest killers of species. And you can see on the board there that it's mostly overexploitation, so things like logging, agricultural expansion, and urban development. So far, over the past sort of 300, 400 years, we have lost, driven 1,000 species to extinction. And that's really difficult. That means that every individual from every population has been wiped out, has ceased to exist on Earth. We have an extra 1 million species which are now threatened with extinction. So this is about 100 to 1,000 times quicker than what is considered a natural extinction background rate. Which is indicating to us that we are now in a mass extinction event. So there's been 5 extinction events so far. The last one was the extinction of the dinosaurs. So this is the only extinction event that has been driven by one species, and that's us humans. It doesn't matter which sort of data sets you use. If we look at the international, WWF International there, the global data sets, or Government of Canada, or even here in Australia, the decline is the same. Australia is not immune to this problem. We assume that Australia is a developed country. We have these strong progressive governance that would mitigate some of these threats, but it's just not the case. Here in Australia, we have lost more than 100 species in the last 300 years. Most of that's due to deforestation and invasive species. So some of my research from the last couple of years has showed that more than 7.7 million hectares of threatened species habitat has been completely destroyed, and only 7% of that was regulated under our federal legislation. So that's about the size of Kentucky. And this is not just vegetation in general, this is threatened species habitat. When we look at Australia as a whole, we have reported that more than 60% of the country is now degraded. And while we know that, places in the dark brown areas like South Australia and Victoria, New South Wales were cleared and degraded many decades ago, we're now seeing Queensland as the next frontier, ground zero for Australia's deforestation. So in 1 year, from 2018 to 19, we lost about 680,000 hectares. So that's about 400,000 MCGs, just massive swaths of vegetation, of native vegetation. During that year, if Queensland was its own country, it would have been the 9th highest deforestation nation in the world. And most of this deforestation is driven by pasture, so agricultural expansion, mostly due to grazing cattle. But it's not just habitat destruction that's causing our species to decline. It's also things like disease, it's invasive predators, it's logging, it's changed fire regimes, and it's climate change. So this is resulting in mass extirpation or mass extinction across Australia. So this is some research that we did a couple of years ago where we mapped historical bird habitats and compared that to where they are now. And we noticed that in some regions in South Australia, 17 species have been completely wiped out from these areas. And this extinction wave is slowly rolling up that east coast, similar patterns to what I showed on the previous slide, where we're experiencing mass habitat loss and degradation. Some of these species are really heavily impacted. So like the glossy-back cockatoo down in Kangaroo Island has been extirpated across 97% of its historical habitat. This beautiful golden-shouldered parrot up in northern Queensland has lost about 96%. So fires are an emerging threat. So for 60 or 70,000 years, First Nations people have been managing the land through really particular fire regimes. And since European colonisation, we have changed that fire regime. Fire regime means the extent and the timing and the frequency and the severity of fires. But we are just burning way too much land and way too frequently. So, of course, we need to protect people and infrastructure, but there is a real disconnect between the way our First Nations people manage the land through fire and the way we are managing fire currently. For a really long time, our species have been impacted by invasive species and disease and habitat loss, so the two sort of purpley colours, but we're now seeing across the taxonomic groups, adverse fire regimes are becoming more and more prevalent. So megafires, that's gone a little bit funny, but that's okay. So megafires are another emerging threat, driven mostly by climate change and poor land management. So if you remember back in 2019, 2020, we had our huge megafires. This was approximately 97,000 square kilometres. So it was just a huge amount of area that burned over almost a year, longer than a year. If we compare that to the Californian wildfires, so the biggest fire in California was about 4,178 square kilometres, so just magnitudes bigger than what we know to be, huge wildfires. About 41% of these fires were within protected areas, and just from this one event, we had to either increase or uplist 26%. There was a 26% increase in our federally listed species. So just from one event, and these events are going to become more severe. So on the left, you'll see the predicted fire regimes within Australia, and you can see the trajectories are going up. Same with tornadoes in the US, those are also increasing, and global drought is also increasing. So climate change consequences are going to be huge for biodiversity, but also for people. So with this unstable climate means that our global food production suffers. And this then has knock-on effects. So our prices of food go up, and then it gets harder to access food and harder to feed our families. We've now noticed that houses are becoming increasingly uninsurable, or the insurance prices are increasingly going up. So 1 in 10 homes could be uninsurable by 2035. Each year we know that more than 20 million people are currently forced to leave their homes because of these extreme climate events like abnormal rainfall, or prolonged droughts, desertification, environmental degradation and sea level rise. We also know from emerging research that more than 75% of emerging infectious diseases such as Ebola are zoonotic and are often arise in these really heavily degraded ecosystems. And the last point there is that as our biodiversity declines, in particular our pollinators, we're noticing that more and more farmers now must hand pollinate their crops. So this is a picture in China. There are now whole regions in China that have lost all of their pollinators, all of their bees, and so now they have to resort to hand pollination, also increasing the price of food. So what can we do to solve these problems? So my lab at Griffith University focus on 5 different things. So we use maths to help make better decisions. So this is an example of a paper we wrote in 2019 where we came up with a way to prioritise conservation actions that maximises the total number of species that can be managed by just managing one species. So for example, this you don't need to read the formula there. Basically, that formula is saying that if you evaluate koalas and they're overlapping with orchids and bilbies and they have similar threatening processes, so if the koala is impacted by cats and foxes and fire, and then you have bilbies impacted by foxes and the orchid is impacting by fire, you can maximise your co-benefits to all other threatened species by choosing the umbrella species really carefully. And so when we optimised that solution, we were able to pick 70 species, which then co-managed 1,000 different species for the same budget that the federal government was managing, but they only managed to co-manage about 150 species. So rather than choosing species based on cuteness or fluffiness, if we can maximise our co-benefits, we can have a bigger bang for our buck. We also inform policy. So we do a lot of evaluations of legislation to look at the effectiveness of legislation and then provide recommendations for change through consultations with federal and state governments. We also strengthen our data foundations. So you can't save a species if you don't know where it is. So we spend a lot of time mapping where species were, mapping where they are now, understanding where species are declining and the cause of that decline. So doing a lot of mapping of threats, in particular invasive species, drought, fire, and of course deforestation. We also spend a lot of time strengthening our spatial plans. So spatial plans are really crucial when you have these competition over land and sea to meet environmental, social and economic objectives. So we try to look at the full suite of the landscape and meet objectives for those multiple objectives. So some colleagues of mine helped develop Marksan, which is now used to plan the Great Barrier Reef, for example, for fishing, for recreation, for science and for conservation. We are also working on building cheap, high-integrity methods for monitoring nature positive commitments. So we are spending a lot of time implementing conservation actions, but often we don't know whether those actions are having any sort of impact. So we are building the first national framework to assess and track nature's health, ensuring that it is scientifically robust, affordable, and internationally defensible. And the last thing that we try to do is raise awareness. So it's really important that people are engaged in the problem, engaged in the conversation. We try to do lots of media, letters to politicians, and get involved as much as possible in days like this. So that is all from me today. I will stop there. I think we have time for questions. Yeah, great, thank you.
Questions from Michelle?
I will also be around for the rest of the day if people want to grab me for coffee afterwards. So no pressure to ask a question now.
I think that there's a lot of research already there, and sometimes, I am from a company, CO2 Australia, and sometimes when we are going to do a project, it's like, oh, what is there? And there's a lot there, right? A lot there already researched. So sometimes I see a gap in which is there and what the policies are saying about it, right? So one of the things that I feel there is I don't know if missing, but it's kind of like there are so many different ways to measure the same thing, right? So for instance, I love that indicator that you said about the umbrella, because it's one thing that we need as in general, not only as a company, but transparency is kind of like a integrated indicator. So my question was, how can better be connected, the research with the policy making?
Yeah, absolutely. Is this on? Oh, okay. I completely agree. There's often a massive disconnect between what the science is saying and what the policy is saying. And I think that comes back to academics potentially not translating their research as well as they should. I think it's really important to not have your research published and then sit on a dusty shelf. It needs to be translated in ways in which people can access. And we were talking about it earlier. It's not just the findings, but the data as well. Often scientists, they, collect amazing data, but it's so inaccessible for people to use it, companies, governments, NGOs. So I think it does come back to scientists having an obligation to, translate their science in meaningful ways and also have all of their data open access and in a way that is usable. I'll critique my own people, but yeah, I think it's our problem that we need to solve.
Hi, thanks for that. My question's sort of off the back of that. If you have a good news story, it'd be great to hear, have you seen your paper or a colleague's paper be applied to like changing legislation? It'd be great just to celebrate examples where it does work.
Yeah, so the umbrella species paper that I showed on the board, so we completed that back in 2019 and presented it to the federal government, then worked really closely with them to update that. And so the current way or method that they have now chosen to choose those 70 or 110 priority species is the method from that paper. So that was a really great win and lots of co-benefits to lots of different species. So that was a good one.
Thank you for a comprehensive presentation.
Thank you.
And I think the point about communicating with policymakers and people, so citizens as well. In relation to that, how much of that work that you have done has been translated into economic costs and benefits? Because at the end of the day, we know politicians and everybody talk about what does it mean for me? What is it going to hit me in my pocket, etc. So the question is about how much of this work is being translated into economic costs and benefits? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. It is really difficult to put a price tag on biodiversity. It's easier for things like carbon, which you can, the AcU method does a really great job at putting a price on carbon, but biodiversity is really complicated. People have done it with valuing ecosystem services, and it's always, $16 trillion for the value of biodiversity. Not to say that that's not important, but it's just really difficult to do and do well. But I agree, it is important. It's the language that our politicians speak, and so we need to do a better job at translating what it means. We've done a lot of work to value, I guess, the restoration side of things. Looking at how much does it cost if you were to destroy this patch of forest, how much would it take to recover it somewhere else in like a biodiversity offsetting situation. But in regards to how much would it then translate to species, to people, it's quite difficult to do. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you very much. If you have further questions, you can talk to Michelle at afternoon tea and after the session. I'm going to close this one. So following Michelle's wonderful keynote, I would like to invite you all to take part in a fun and participatory activity called the Biodiversity Collage. So the Biodiversity Collage is a workshop that was developed in France in 2019 by Géraldine and Geoffrey Villiers, Charles Siro, and the company Deloitte. People for Nature is the official country partner for that workshop, and we have the ambition of educating every single Australian about the causes and consequences of biodiversity loss. Big job. But why a biodiversity collage? Well, as Michelle mentioned, Australia's biodiversity track record is deeply concerning. And while much of the world's attention is on reducing CO2, we must also focus on protecting the ecosystems that sustain life. The Biodiversity Collage is based on the IPBES report. The IPBES is the equivalent of the IPCC for biodiversity for people that may have never heard of IPBES. And the collage transforms complex scientific science into a game of discovery. And we'll be using 39 carefully curated cards to piece together how ecosystem function, why biodiversity matters, and what threatens it. This workshop is based on a collective intelligence methodology, which means that we'll be working in little groups to solve the puzzle. And with that in mind, we can kindly ask everyone to listen to one another and be respectful and supportive throughout the activity. Everybody is going to be at a different level, and that's totally okay. Some of you who may be experts already in biodiversity, you might be thinking, this is going to be boring, I'm not going to learn anything. You're going to discover a wonderful educational tool that you may be able to bring to your workplace, your community, schools, So really looking forward to think also what you're thinking about that tool. Today we have 5 wonderful facilitators, 2 Audreys, you can, Sarah is over there, Michelle, and myself. And we are going now to divide the room and have people dispersing. Can you please arrange the tables? We need 2 tables here. And we have 2 tables here and 2 tables in the Wawa room. So if I can ask you all to come down and take place around the tables, we'll be having around 7 people per table, so don't all come and jump on those 2 tables. So we need about 7 people around those 2 tables. And it is my pleasure to introduce our panel session moderator today, Audrey Penet, that is here in purple. Audrey is a social ecologist and founder of AlterCOP, a strategic sustainability practice. She is also the co-founder of Urban Grounding, which revitalizes unused spaces and rooftops through microfarms. She also serves on the board of the Australian Green Infrastructure Network. So thank you very much, Audrey, and the floor is yours.
Thanks. Okay? Okay, can you hear me? Yeah. Fantastic. Thanks a lot for coming along today. I too would actually like to start off with an acknowledgement of country. I'd like to acknowledge the unceded lands of the Turrbal and Beggar people on which we gather here today at AlterCOP 30 in Brisbane, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. And thank them for their ongoing stewardship and willingness to share their deep knowledge and understanding of these beautiful lands on which we live, work and play. So thanks for the introduction, Danny, and I spoke to Danny yesterday and said, don't worry, I'm going to cut my introduction short. And then I went home and promptly made it longer. But I'm just going to speak really quickly, so you won't even notice. But it's been fantastic. I'll just say to the panel members, just settle in because it's my taking over. It's been fantastic over the last couple of days because I've met some really amazing people. And at these events, it's very common where there's a plethora of emotions that take place. And some people that I've spoken to have felt quite sad and upset about the climate crisis and some of the challenges that we're facing. Some have been quietly optimistic. Others have fiercely and enthusiastically are banging that drum and going out and finding out to fight on a daily basis. And then there's others who feel that they don't know which step to take, how to move forward, because it's too overwhelming and they're feeling a lot of anxiety because of some of these things that we're facing. And so I guess I wanted to start this conversation by addressing those people who are feeling a bit despondent or a bit of despair. I've had over 30 years in the sustainability space now, working across multiple different sectors. And I have never seen the acceleration and adoption of sustainability and transformative thinking as much as I've seen in the last couple of years. So to me, that it's moving at an unprecedented pace globally across all different sorts of cultures, societal levels and economies. And to me, that gives me hope. So I'm hoping that that will also give you some hope that there, as much as we saw from Michelle's presentation, that those numbers were quite startling in terms of our biodiversity loss, that there's actually some really good positive stories out there to share as well. There's still work to be done, and you can look to any social media channel and find the Jim Bloom stories, because they're definitely there. But also what's there is this movement of global acceptance of sustainability as a common language now. But having said that, we're in the middle of a paradigm shift, I think, and I think paradigm shifts are often messy and confusing. And to me, I think it's really important that we kind of start to talk about that common language. And a lot of people have said to me, sustainability, it's done, it's dusted, it's had its day. And I feel a bit defensive after 30 years of working with that term. It's been my friend for that long, so sustainability. But it's been mixed, it's used differently, it's been misused, it's been misinterpreted, it's hard to define. But then I hear this whisper of this new term starting to come to the fore, which is regenerative. And I think, well, in its simplest form, regenerative thinking or regenerative design is, in its simplest term, is creating the conditions that support life. And to me, that is a really important signal, because I think that means that we're evolving. Having said that, listening to Mandy, the MC on Monday, and her experience at the Brisbane Club, maybe some of us are evolving at a different rate than others. But nonetheless, we're evolving. And with that evolution comes a responsibility to kind of address a truth, a hard truth, which is we've never properly valued nature. So when we did biodiversity collage before, we witnessed that every part of our existence, our economy, our infrastructure, our social systems depends entirely on those ecosystem services that nature provides. Clean water, pollination, soil fertility, climate regulation, oxygen, that's very handy. And yet we behave as though these things are free, infinite, and separate from us. And right now our relationship, I think, with nature is deeply disconnected. It's like we're living on credit. We're drawing down on that natural capital without ever paying it back. We are in the red. And when nature's back office starts sending in invoices, they're going to be big. Which brings us to the heart of today's discussion, because if we accept that life in all its forms is the foundation of everything we depend on, then building a nature-positive economy isn't just an environmental ideal, it's an economic necessity. It's the only way to bring our system back into balance, to pay down that debt, and to design an economy that restores more than it consumes. So that's what this panel is here to discuss and explore, how Australia can build an economy that protects, restores, and regenerates nature. So we have an extraordinary panel with us today to explore these kind of ideas, and bringing perspectives from science, industry, culture, and community about this very topic. So let's meet them. So we have Dr. Andrew Turley, who leads a multidisciplinary team at the Atlas of Living Australia, working at the intersection of biological sciences and technology to make Australia's biodiversity data more visible and actionable. Welcome, Andrew. We have we've got Dr. Victoria Perez Martinez, I hope I've said that correctly, Carbon Project Manager at CO2 Australia, our sponsor for today, and a biologist, agronomist, and currently overseeing the Australian Carbon Credit Unit Scheme projects nationally and here in Australia. Next to Victoria, we've got Victoria. Next we have Leanne Griffin from ARB. Welcome. Circular economy advocate driving the shift from extractive to regenerative business models. We have Cameron Costello, Indigenous consultant and traditional owner, bridging culture, country, and economic renewal through First Nations knowledge. Welcome, Cameron. And we have Heidi Osborne, graduate civil engineer, bringing a new generation perspective to nature-positive design and infrastructure. Welcome, Heidi. And we have Dick Copeman, some of you may know, as co-founder of North East Street City Farm, championing grassroots regenerative practice and community-led food systems. Welcome, Dick. So we've actually had two panel members unable to attend today, but I've invited another panel member up here if you'd like to come down, Padma. If you'd like to come down and join us on the panel. Padma asked a very interesting question in our last session, and I just thought it would be interesting to have your experience and understanding of putting an economic value on nature, given that's the topic of our conversation today. Welcome, Hannah. Okay, so it's hard to sum up everybody's profile in one sentence. That was the hardest part of putting this paper together. So I do encourage you to visit the AlterCOP website where everybody's bios are on there. And if you're ever looking for a good news story, hop on, have a look at what this panel are doing on a daily basis, which are all kind of good news stories and fighting the good fight. So this is a huge topic, so let's dive right in. So for ease of this topic, I've kind of put it into 3 themes. Hopefully that speaks to some of the skill sets on the panel. And then at the end of the panel discussion, we'll have about 10-15 minutes for Q&A, audience participation. But my first question is to you, Cameron. So Cameron, here representing the oldest civilization on the planet, I would think it would be fair to say that regenerative thinking is central to Indigenous knowledge systems. So how can these principles guide Australia's transition to a more nature-positive economy?
Thank you, and just acknowledge the expertise on the panel. I think, yes, you're correct. So I think with First Nations ties to, spiritual ties to land, water, air, land, sea, sky, regenerative thinking's been there. It's part of our identity in caring for country, and our economies have traditionally been regenerative in nature. And I think that's the great opportunity for the globe to tap into that knowledge and experience. I think bringing it from a quantum mooc perspective, and I guess my background is being a CEO for our native title body and having our rights recognised in 2011, and caring for, actively being re-engaged with caring for country. In being engaged in that process, where we are actually now, our rights are recognised and we're able to go back and look at managing country and recommencing our economy. So we've been excluded from the economy, dispossessed, now we're back there. I think that's the opportunity. I was saying before, if you look at native title rights, for example, across the country, that's growing. So actual control and management of lands which enable a positive nature economy, or nature positive economy, is the opportunities there. And that's about empowering First Nations, re-engaging with First Nations and providing the capacity for them to unlock that as well. And also the education around what does nature positive mean, what does blue carbon mean, and that's, for me, that opportunity for translating, working together, and sharing and collaborating. So, yeah, it can be overwhelming to see what the negative consequences are, but we have to start locally. And so for us, it's like quantum mooc people. What are we doing on our country? How do we collaborate with community, industry and government to be nature positive as well? And it is about strategy as well. So like for us, we were a mining island. Our island was a mining island from the 1950s, so 70 years of mining. When it came back, there was so were they going to extend mining or not, or were there going to be national parks, nature positive? And so the natural spiritual ties to country and looking at the regenerative thinking, we chose national parks because mining was not, they weren't offering anything, they're offering more, but not an extent that we would go that far. So for me, it's about how do we collectively go, here's a better way forward for all of us, and it's actually building capacity and growing that as well. So you look at us now with national parks, sea country, fisheries industry, all regenerative thinking and all looking at nature positive and how it's sustainable for our community. That's what we're now re-engaging, and that's through partnerships as well. So, native bees through to, arts and culture, tourism that's sustainable. These are the things that we're looking at. And I think as we grow with native title and other aspects, cultural heritage, like empowering First Nations and working with them strategically, and is the opportunity that we've got.
I think we've heard that a lot over the last couple of days. It's having the right people in the right room at the right time, raising the right mobilization of capital and infrastructure to have those right conversations at a critical time. So thanks for that. Partnerships are key and collaboration is key, and also understanding how important it is to bring some of that complex sustainability and regenerative language into communities and speaking in layman's terms to actually help people understand where it's coming from. So
I was just going to say, like, walking around to the tables and seeing things on the table about fire management, pest management, like, we're doing that. We've been doing it for thousands of years, but we're doing it now even more so. And so all those aspects we're talking about, First Nations people are delivering that, and that's that partnership. So how land managers can work together to actually identify how they're going to manage fire better, how they're going to manage water better, how they're going to manage pests better. That's the opportunity.
yeah, fantastic. So Victoria, I might go to you next, just on regenerative practices, looking at your work managing carbon and biodiversity projects with CO2 Australia. How do you see community engagement, which is often a voice that's left off the table? How do you see community engagement and land-based projects turning these regenerative principles that Cameron's alluded to into real, tangible outcomes?
So I think companies in general, they need to have like First Nation as a must. And like coincidentally, we had like last week our reconciliation action plan that it seems pretty advertising here, but it was like actually happening. And I think the first thing for companies is intention, right? And it's the intention not only to dedicate some time to it, but also oversee how this can be linked to our processes. So for instance, we have an indigenous engagement in which we do prior, informed, and free consent. And it's how this, because everything sounds so good like in words, but it's like free is no pressure, right? So when we tell them, oh, we want to do this with you, it's like we're giving you the information, but we are not going to say, oh, this is good or bad, right? It's giving you the information. And then prior consent, so it needs to be prior that we register the project, right? And then it's informed, so we need to give the First Nation all the information for them to take the decision. And then another thing that I want to bring to the table is time, because time is very important in the business, right? And things need to be fast. And when we sit down in the table with First Nation, we're talking different language. So it's crazy how, for instance, for us, nature is separate from humans, but for First Nation, nature and humans are together, right? So there are a lot of things, or sometimes I'm a scientist and we need data, right? But for them, it's like, we've seen this all the time, like you don't need data, right? So it's also like to check how we can like ground that in the same level, but also have the time to sit down and be recognized as part of the process, because then the other side of the coin is like the company saying, we need this project right now. So it's also about how that can be recognized from policies to basically the credit that we are obtaining, that it should be, like it must be something that needs to be. And when I say consent, is not only hope, again, that this sounds so good, that is a challenge, but it's not only like, give the like consent that they say like, yeah, we tick the box, but also they have a lot of expertise on that, as they say, like in fire management, in pest management. So it's also like, okay, this is our plan. Like, how do you see the plan, right? And again, this seems so good in here. So it's a challenge that we face all the time. Sometimes it's even difficult to identify the native people that we need to address. And sometimes it just could take like months, to just identify that. And we are talking about business marketers that is like, okay, do you have the project ready? So it's just different times that we need to converge, like in many levels.
Finding that commonality of cultural differences, essentially. Like, we know that a lot of corporates operate at an accelerated rate, but it's interesting with carbon sequestration takes a long time.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting parallel to make and create the time to engage local communities and the right local communities to be part of that process and hear what they have to say, given the observed scientific observation that's happened over tens of thousands of years. Yeah. So I might just jump to Padma, if that's okay, and just get you to give us a quick introduction about yourself. And I invited Padma onto the panel just totally spontaneously, as I'm prone to do, because I thought you asked a really interesting question, which was about the economic value of nature. So can you just tell us why you came to AlterCOP today and what a bit of your background, just quickly?
Well, you have really put me in on this.
I know, I'm sorry.
No,
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. This is too close to my heart not to say yes to and not to come today, because environment sustainability is something very close to my heart. I'm an ecological... Okay. I'm an ecological economist, which I'm sure not many people have heard of that as a discipline, because it's not taught as a discipline. It brings together ecology, economics, and social dimensions in an integrated way. So when I looked at your thing about knowledge to action, I interpret that slightly differently, knowledge for outcomes. And that knowledge can be multidimensional. The traditional knowledge, the scientific knowledge, ecological knowledge, economics, etc. You can have the whole list of it. So that's my background. And the real challenge is that I've been grappling with: how do we bring the traditional knowledge with the scientific knowledge of the Western concept of knowledge to address the issues that we're grappling with today. And it's not just the issues, we really what outcomes we want. So when we talked about the positive economy, I feel, again, I have an issue with it. It's not about positive economy. It's about positive nature or environment or something. So I'm not trying to criticize anything, but it's just that in my mind, till we actually frame what we are here for, I personally find it difficult to answer that question. So when I asked that question about economic values, it was more from the point of view of the outcomes we want requires people to change. For people to change means that we need to be able to connect with them in the language that they understand. And unfortunately, in this capitalist world, it's the economics, the dollars and cents that really people seem to have a common language. So that's where it comes in, as to how do we then convey the message we want for the outcome, to convince people to act and change.
Sure.
And economic values are an important part of it. And economics doesn't necessarily only mean what you can buy and sell. There are non-market values, which is what, in fact, I don't have that thing with me, but the collage that we were playing with had all those different services. And economists or resource economists have tried to quantify those different services. So I think, in a way, for us, if we want to convey the importance of biodiversity and nature, we would need to be able to translate some of that into economic terms.
Great.
But recognizing that not everything can be valued, and not everything can have a dollar value.
Yeah,
So I'll just
we'll
keep
come
it at
back to that. Yeah, that's great. Thank you for that. And I think it's interesting having the plethora of different diversity of thought at the table as well. That's really important, including grassroots communities. So Dick, that brings me to my question for you. Northeast Street City Farm, you've been leading community-based regeneration for decades. What can grassroots initiatives teach larger systems, much like the one that Padma's referenced, about how regeneration takes hold?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Well, just to give a bit of background, Northeast Street City Farm is only a couple of kilometres from here, and it's a two hectare bit of degraded land beside an urban creek that over the 31 years we've turned into a productive and biodiverse sort of community facility. And I think what we can the message from our experience to the broader community and what you call the larger system is that we've been able to work very much from the ground up in two ways. One is by being a bit of a pioneer and a model of sustainability in action that then influences other people to follow suit. I mean, we're the second community garden in Brisbane, and there must be now 40 or 50. So we've been a good model and a sort of a nurturer of that whole movement of bringing people and often on degraded land, often on floodplains, and turning them into productive spaces. But we've also just, things like when we first started regenerating the creek, restoring natural vegetation, the council said you can only plant one tree every 10 metres. And we said that's because they've got to let the floodwater get away, Can't block the floodwater. But we said that's ridiculous, and we just went ahead and planted in clumps of plants, 2 metres apart, 1 metre for... Well, of course, that's how everyone does it now. So, I mean, sometimes community groups have just got to get out there and do it, and then other people follow. Another example is running workshops on composting and setting up a community composting hub. Well, we started all that, and now councils run that, which is fantastic. So I think community groups can consult, rather than always be consulted from top down, we can provide a model that goes up the other way. I think the other way in which we can really provide a model is providing an entry point for ordinary people into this whole topic. We get a huge diversity of people who come. They might come to buy food at our organic market or to buy plants at our nursery. And then they might hear about an education program or workshop that we're running, maybe even one by that fellow there. and so they get involved in that. Or they might come and do when they buy the plant, they don't know what to do with it. So they see there's a workshop on how to grow plants in summer or something like that. So that it's a real entry point for people, and often people who increasingly are feeling scared about the future. They're sick of being indoors, behind screens, wondering where all those emails go and what effect they're having. And they just want to get out of doors and do something physical with other people. That's good for community and good for the environment. And so we provide a real entry point for that. And a lot of people, some of them stay around, some of them come for a bit, and then they've got it all together. They're going to go and do a uni course, or they're going to set up a business, or they're going to go teaching, or they may have a tree change and go to the bush and grow their own. I mean, we've got a huge network of people who've come through our place and seeded out into the community in doing grassroots sort of sustainability and climate action. So I think that's the sort of message that we have from the bottom, from the grassroots to the larger systems, that larger systems depend upon lots of active, smaller groups at a local community, rather than the other way around. Yep.
I love that. It's a topic close to my heart because I started off with sustainable agriculture, so and growing organic food down in southwest Victoria, and I think that kind of empowerment definitely speaks to a kind of localised economy and empowering people to actually be resilient and grow their own food and learn how to do that and share food with their wider community. So I think that's as much a part of a localised economic system as much as anything else that we're talking about today. It's really important. Which brings me round to one of the foundation pillars of sustainability, Heidi, which is about futures thinking. It's really important. If we can't envisage our future, we can't manifest it, and we can't take stewardship over it, and we can't see it come to fruition. So as a person representing the next generation of engineers, or even just yourself, how do you see the future of a nature-based economy? What does that look like for you?
Yeah, so I think I was reading, Patagonia's sustainability report recently, and their message was nothing we do is sustainable. At the core of it, we're using products, we're using resources that we can't just replace as they were. And so it's the same as being an engineer. Urban development is going to happen. At the same time, it has a massive impact on biodiversity. So knowing that it's going to happen as a young engineer, it's looking at what we can do to try and mitigate those effects as best as possible. So I think there's some really cool examples of that. I used to work in structural engineering. So one of my mentors, he was building more related to carbon, but a carbon calculation tool looking at, for developers, looking at developing a building, if they're using concrete versus timber, for example, how much extra carbon emissions is that going to produce? So he was saying to me, look, Heidi, if you can use or convince a developer to use timber instead of concrete, that will have a massive impact on the total carbon emissions, more than you can have in your personal life. Now, obviously, that's referring to carbon, and biodiversity is a whole different ballgame. But I think that just puts into perspective the kind of impact that you can have through your work, not just through your personal life, but through our careers and what we do every day. We spend so much time at work.
A powerful tool to have, you know, and I think the conversation, certainly over the last 5 years or so, with that, talking about drawdown, pulling carbon dioxide equivalent out of the atmosphere, and then certainly the embodied carbon. So having a tool like that is really critical, and it's a new way of approaching a project, right? So it's a fantastic example. Thank you. And it kind of segues beautifully into Leanne with circular economy principles. They're often seen as industry focused, but what role do communities play bringing circularity and regeneration together?
Yes, thank you. I think Dick kind of answered this one before a little bit with the, like circular economy is a systemic approach, and it's very complex, it's very large, and it's quite holistic. And it does look at the systems, you know, the ecosystems, the systems, the economic systems. And I think we do forget that it's an economic system. It's not just about how we use materials. It's actually about how we value and extract value and reuse value and all of that as well. But a large system can be made up of a bunch of smaller systems. And when those smaller systems are working and are working kind of in with nature and with biodiversity, that is then the model that can be kind of scaled up to larger systems. And within that model, obviously, is we can have space for multiple systems. You know, we need more diversity in the economic market. We need more, like we do have kind of one economic market globally, it's capitalism. I'm not saying, and we just have to be, I guess, that's just the reality of things. But we know like strong nature systems require diversity, and we learned that in the kind of the game that we did before. And I guess, yeah, like that idea is a lot of that comes from community. It comes from traditional practices. It comes from how we live and how we interact with the land. It comes from our spiritual connection, our kind of personal connection, our family connections. It's all interrelated. We can't separate these things out as much as we might like to do. And I guess industry and business kind of tends to, science a little bit as well, tends to kind of separate it, but it's all interconnected. And I guess that's kind of where the solution sits, is really starting to understand the interconnection and the fact that and like someone said this years and years ago, but if you take people out of the equation, there's nothing, you know, like nothing happens. Like it's not a technical solution. It's not money. It's not kind of anything else. It's people. It's decisions people make every single day that are having these impacts. So that is, I guess, the lesson and the model that we can take from community. Look at where it's working. Look at where it's really healthy. Look at where it's regenerative. We have great examples of that starting to emerge, and we have some long-standing practices that we can be learning from as well, is look at that and go, okay, what can we learn? What is adaptable? What is interconnected? And what can we take to different systems and then build on those systems and build on those systems? And eventually we'll create an overarching system, and that's the circularity element as well.
Fantastic answer. I think it's interesting to me what you just said, because we've inherited an industrial worldview from the Industrial Revolution, 1780 or whenever it was, and it's very linear in the way. And what we're starting to see now, and I get really excited about this, is our approach to things. We're starting to think in systems more and more, and the biodiversity collage is a great example of that. So, but I have a bit of another question that I've just pegged in there, so surprise. Because I had a conversation with a young person yesterday, and it just kind of resonated with me, who mentioned that apathy is pretty common in her peer group because they believe that it's just too late. Everything is kind of stuffed, and so there's no point in doing anything. So, Andrew, I might just jump to you on that one. How do we, sorry, Andrew, how do we re-engage young people and reignite their sense of stewardship or even renewed love of nature? How do we do that? No pressure. No pressure.
Well, look, from my own experience, I think it's actually, the first step is actually face the reality. We're not in a good spot. Every metric we look at is going in the wrong direction. But we have to also think about the fact that then we are just one person in this. Control our egos and then get up in the morning and go do something. We're all on here on this earth. We've got a chance every morning that we wake up to think about what can we do today to make the world a better place? What can you do? And when you take that perspective, I think that you start to see that there's so many opportunities to do that. And then I think from that, you can start to see some examples that are inspiring where we can see where things change culturally. And I'm going to use solar panels as a really good example where some of the research I've seen around the uptake on solar panels, initial movers was about, things like the cost. That'll save me money, but it was a big investment. Over time, one of the biggest things about solar panels is that they were visible. So they started to see solar panels was in everyone else's roof. So all of a sudden I sit there and I walk down my street and I see that half the street has solar panels. Culturally, I go, I want to join them. I want solar panels. So I think some of the biggest things we can also do is start to wear what we're doing to make the change, make it visible, put it out there, connect with more people that are doing it. And I think that that's how we can see that cultural change. So it's a bit of both. It's a bit of just accepting that, it's not there, but we can still move forward. And we need to deal with this as a society. And we do that as a society by taking the first step ourselves.
Fantastic. I think that's great. I think it's a great response because, getting up and actioning something, visit Northern Street City Farm, or just that kind of example of things that are happening around us. And we saw great examples over the last couple of days of localised initiatives that people can participate in and be a part of. So even if it's something like joining a rubbish group or connecting with the UN youth ambassadors, that'd be fantastic. Anyone else on the panel want to respond to that question?
Yeah. So I think thinking about our role in this that we call nature-based, that is nothing else like caring for the environment, is important. So one thing is sometimes we think that we don't have any influence, like for the people that have money, and sometimes I feel like that. But also is thinking about we are the ones who go to the grocery and choose the products. We are the ones who choose if I'm gonna buy this airline or this other airline, right? So I think Australia is a very wealthy country, so probably I wouldn't be able to say this in my country that is a South American underdeveloped country. But here we have like I would say the money to choose better. And to choose better means like to know what are we buying, from everything that we buy, that is a lot, like flights, clothes, food, and say, oh, okay, this company or this is agricultural organic, or these are 100% cotton organic, and they give a 0.1% to this community church. So I think, yeah, like we have a lot of power, even if it seems that we don't.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So actually I talked about this like these days, just preparing for this, and I'm kind of like thinking like, yeah, like I'm coming back to this. I try to be, you know, like secondhand shopping, but you know, like these events bring yourself again to that empowering. That is the importance of these events as well. And I also value so much like the initiatives like as Dick, and I think everything comes from a local level, and those, as he already said, become like, how do you say, like nucleus, like centers of expansion.
Sure.
And as you say, like with the solar, is something that is visual. Unfortunately, there are things that you cannot see. But for instance, solar is very visible. So it's like when you land in Australia, it's like, oh, you know, what a nice country that have all this there. So yeah.
Okay. Thanks. Thanks,
Yeah.
Victoria.
So think about ourselves as part of this system, and how can we do better to change the system from where we are, and have a bit of hope on that as well.
Great. Okay, I'm just going to move quickly on to the next theme, which is about measurement. So we know in sustainability what gets measured matters. So measuring prosperity and new indicators. So Andrew, back to you. The Atlas of Living Australia holds one of the richest biodiversity data sets in the country. From your perspective, how does better visibility of nature through data, mapping and technology help us make the economy more nature positive?
Yeah, so the Atlas of Living Australia, we're Australia's biodiversity database. So we connect data from, we originally started about 10 years ago connecting museums. Before then, museums would have collections. Only the people in those museums knew what was in those collections. We started by connecting those different museums up. And then over the last 10 years, we've had more government data sets, researcher and industry data sets. And these days, about 95% of our data is coming in from citizen science, particularly iNaturalist. So most of our data is what we call occurrence data. It's a plant or animal that's been detected at this particular place at this particular time. So our role itself is really about a connector. It's about having that data shared with the ALA, and then the ALA, because of the sheer mass of the data that then comes in, it starts to become so big that you can't deny it. So government, researchers, industry, they start to realise they have to come to places like the ALA to get that data, and they have to use that in their decision making. So some of the examples that we see it being used is threatened species. So not every threatened species is going to be detected by a museum researcher or an environmental worker. Quite often it is in your citizen scientists who are just out there, they take a photo of something, there's a threatened species. Because the ALA is public and it's an open database, it's there for anyone to go and see. So if there's a decision to be made about what happens with that area, you can't deny that there's a threatened species that has at least at one time in place been detected in that area. The other big areas that we're seeing the data being used, particularly in government, is around biosecurity. So when we have new invasive threats coming into Australia, or ones that are here that are spreading, to have really any chance of being able to respond it and stop it having big impacts, we need to know about that early. But you think about how big Australia is, and there's probably a couple of thousand people that work in the biosecurity sector. There's no chance for them to be the eyes and ears everywhere. So again, citizen science is absolutely critical to that, to having people out there looking. But again, we need to be able to connect that data with the decision makers and the people who have the capacity to respond. And again, that's where we see ALA has that role of making those connections and be able to go, you know, Joe Blow detected, you know, a fire ant in New South Wales, and within a week, all your biosecurity departments will know about that and be able to actually mount a response in situations like that.
Have you got numbers on that? Like how many in your citizen science troops on the ground do you have who are inputting into that data set?
Yeah, so for iNaturalist, which is our biggest data set, there's over 100,000 users registered in Australia. And there's over 150 million occurrence records that are now within ALA. That's covering all over Australia. Most of those records are near where people live, so we don't have many records from the middle of the desert. But that's still extremely valuable data and extremely useful. And data sets on the scale that, you know, government and industry researchers have never had access to before and haven't been able to use. So, yeah.
Interesting. And Victoria, just jumping to you on that, what tools or methods are emerging in carbon and restoration projects to better capture ecological and social outcomes, not just carbon numbers?
So now we're working with something called co-benefits.
Yep.
That is basically like okay. It's funny because in another symposium it was like carbon and nature. That is the same thing that happens with human and nature. So carbon at the end of the day is nature as well. But when we say like carbon projects, people usually like, oh, carbon projects are just monocultures for net zero. So I think, yes, they are for net zero, but if they are done in the proper way, let's say, like kind of like instead of a monoculture, have different trees that are native from the area, at the end of the day, we're doing restoration with carbon projects. So co-benefits is basically working with biodiversity co-benefits and social co-benefits and being able to measure and most importantly, audit them to be able to be transparent, right? Because what happened nowadays is like any company say like, oh yeah, these have co-benefits, but there's nothing to prove that. So it's important that they have like some audit, and it's important for them to be measurable and repeatable, and the things that the data track. But yeah, it's basically measure a baseline and say, okay, we didn't have this species here, and now we have it. We didn't have this animal here that was threatened, and it's the first time that we see it, and probably that connects with the ALA because a person saw it like for the first time in 10 years, right? So in CO2 Australia, and again, that sounds advertisement, but this is more to bring awareness to the market. We think the market is really in an infant state to be recognize the importance of co-benefits. So we need also from policies and from investors that they start recognizing that we need to go beyond carbon and we need to go beyond net zero to kind of like restore as well, and to kind of like do it properly and do it a little bit farther to be able to restore and not just stock carbon. That is the main end of a carbon project.
Sure. Yeah, interesting. And it's interesting, Padma, that brings me to you, and this is again a spontaneous question. We have this technology now, we have these tools and resources available to us, and we can measure. We've got citizen troops on the ground who are bringing those species to light. How then can we, if you spoke to me about a nature-based economy 20 years ago, I would have thought that was a complete oxymoron. It just seems like a juxtaposition. With these new revised tools that are coming to light, measuring biodiversity and again with our biodiversity collage, understanding the ecosystems that some of these species contribute to, how do we even begin to put a value on nature?
I think there are two aspects, and maybe a little. Yeah, if I may just pick on the two examples that we talked about. One was about the carbon and co-benefits. So now, and looking at wetlands and mangroves in particular, which is my first love, as I used to tell my husband, you actually have the carbon sequestration of the blue carbon now being valued together with the other ecosystem services that are being provided by the wetlands. So, for example, fisheries or forestry or or other cultural things. So that's where the two, so if you have got those two numbers there about the carbon sequestration, the value of it, particularly related to that species or that context, and you have got those other ecosystem services information, then you can start valuing them. What is the value of the whole ecosystem?
Yeah, interesting.
So you can do that.
Yeah,
so taking
great.
the other example about the fire ants or any other invasive species, you can do a similar thing. When the species are coming in, and you know the devastation that it's going to cause on the agriculture or human or whatever it is, you can start to value the economic costs of that invasive species. So you need to have science, and you need to know the dynamics of that particular species to be able to model and predict, and then provide an economic dollar cost or benefit information.
Much like Garno and Stern did for the climate report.
That is one of the, I was involved with one of the IPCC reports way back when we were trying to have the climate change and disaster risk.
Yeah.
And we were talking about the disaster risk management.
Yeah.
How did that relate to carbon or climate change?
Yeah.
And at that stage, they were not talking about them together. Similarly, with the climate change and the co-benefits that was not even talked about in the past, now you can see that they're actually, even during the COP recent, they're saying that we should be treating those two international agreements in parallel. You cannot isolate them. So you need to have that science, you need the information, and you need to have the quantification to really get that economic values done.
Fantastic. I'm going to jump to the theme very quickly of economic infrastructure and just bring our panel discussion, official panel discussion, to a close before we open it up to questions. And I'll end with you, Cameron, if that's okay. How might we expand the idea of prosperity, like redefining what prosperity actually is, beyond profit or growth, to bring that long-term view into changing the way Australia values and protects the living infrastructure that we depend on? So it's the end question, and it's a doozy, sorry.
No, it's a perler. I kind of touch on, like you talk about the young people and apathy, and I think I can understand why. I've got two kids, 18 and 15, and their access to education and information now is so at the touch of a screen. So they're educating me on what's happening in the world. So they would be seeing all this stuff. They're educated, but they're not empowered. And so empowering the educated and the young, I have an unwavering faith in our young people. And if we can empower them with the knowledge that they're not shackled by the prejudices of previous years, and I think from an environmental and nature and perspective, if we can do that and empower them, the future will change. And that prosperity, it's redefining what prosperity is. It's not about dollars. And being the CEO for an Aboriginal corporation, which is managing and trying to balance those different things of what's important, whether there's a hashtag culture before coin, so if we were making decisions that were more about economic outcome than spiritual, cultural, environmental, that would pop up. So how do we value those other important elements which are about culture and nature? And I think it's really educating and changing the narrative, and that's being strong. So how do we do that? So for me, thinking about those sorts of things that are going to be game changers, and I think of things that are coming, like Brisbane 2032 Olympics and Paralympic Games, a great lever for us to be looking. Every 4 years out, they have the Cultural Olympiad. I've been saying we should be looking at the Environmental Olympiad. So the 4 years out, what are those key themes for each year that we want? It might be threatened species, or, what do we want to do to actually go, all right, how do we elevate this to a global level, but empower our young people who are going to be running the games, like 2032, how do we empower them coming through, and what's changing what prosperity is? And prosperity for us is that is believing our children are going to inherit the earth and inherit that well-being. So for us, that's really critical for me to go, all right, and we're doing things like we want to see as a legacy from the Games and beyond, World Heritage listing for Moreton Bay, which then brings in a whole range of different things. But within that is about how we unlock and utilise lands in a regenerative way that, from a First Nations perspective, we're actually getting the rights recognised for our traditional natural resources, and we've got access to those, so that's sustainable for our own First Nations people into the future, and that will be valued on the sustainability of our culture, the sustainability of our threatened species, the revival and survival of threatened species on our country, and the general, I think, for us, it's measuring, but it's also overturning where we are, like piping water off our island is not sustainable. There's other ways of doing it. Solar. For me, it's those reframing, and we've just got to be bold, and we've got to build our army of across the globe, and that is that connection. So I invite everybody to come over to our island and see what we're doing over there. We just opened our cultural centre, but I think that's how we take it from here, and utilising what we're doing to actually build our army and our connections across the globe to collaborate through research, through citizen science, through... I want to hang out with Padma, by the way. She's just the coolest one going.
No offence to the rest of the panel.
No, we're all pretty cool. But I think that's, for me, I'm forever in believe that there's a global movement that's happening, and it is like what you're saying. I can't remember the last time I bought a caged egg. You know what I mean? So it is about us making those choices and educating people, and then empowering the educated to take things forward in collaboration with building from community. So like what Dick and that are doing, community can, manoeuvre to influence, and corporates, so industry, getting those allies for that, and then that influences government as well, because government's the other key one too. Like, we can put stuff in policy, but unless there's that good faith and goodwill from them too, then we'll be doing it on our own.
Wow. I hear a lot of people scratching their heads about legacy projects for the Olympics, and I think why are they scratching their heads is an obvious answer right there. Moreton Bay is a heritage listed area. That's fantastic. Love it. So I'd like to open it up to our audience to ask any questions that you might have to our fantastic panel members. Got anyone? Yeah? Oh, hang on. Is there a mic coming?
Sweet, thank you. I actually just had a question for Cameron. I know you're referencing yourself as a part of the Quandamooka people. I just wanted to know whether you were referencing Moreton Island specifically, and that is where the cultural centre is. I just wanted to know more about that, and if that's what you were talking about.
So Minjerribah, North Stradbroke Islands, where we just opened our arts and cultural centre there. So so you can come across, and it's open Friday, Saturday, Sundays. But it's also an opportunity to it's a great context, because we're growing national park was from 10% and we're going to 80% fire management, koalas, using drone technology around koalas. But coming over and getting that experience, because I think the role that the arts and creative sector has in terms of promoting and enhancing the message as well is really important. So cross-sectoral collaboration can happen. Because from our cultural centre perspective, I'm going, we want to have a exhibition about caring for country and fire management practices, and we've got volunteers who are working with Queensland Herbarium to look at all the rare plants and native plants on our island, and so how do we do an exhibition of that? So a circular economy exhibition. So for me, that's how do we utilise the arts and cultural sector to educate. And I'll go back to Aunty Ujuru Noonuckle. So she, in her remaining days, was at Mungalba, which is the sit-down place, and school buses would come, and she would educate them about culture and their connection to country. And so we're sort of scaling that up and going, our cultural centre becomes a truth-telling site, but becomes an educational site about caring for country and what we can do better, and how people can come over and be ambassadors. And we're even talking about pledges for tourists coming over to pledge to be better citizens for, we call it Jana Marumba, which Jana is our foot, and Marumba is good, so good footprint. So how can we create that education and those connections with exhibitions from across there? So whether it's France or, native Canadians, how do we have that global interaction? Because with technology we can do that. So whale conservation, we can be connecting to that system or ecosystems all over the globe. So come on over.
Yeah, it's super exciting. I love Minjerribah, so I'm keen to go.
Any other questions from the audience today? Yep, we've got one down the front.
Is it on? Oh, sorry. This question is really just for anyone on the panel. I think just in general, it's not really about Australia, but I like to ask this question. It's more of a, do you think, I think Victoria touched on it a little bit, Australia is a wealthy country. There are a fair few number of countries or societies that are a bit wealthier than the other. Do you think that building a nature positive economy from a global perspective, is that a priority for countries that are not as wealthy? And if so, how do you think you can empower these communities? Because from a layman's point of view, a lot of people that I'm familiar with, they just don't find it a priority. We live in a capitalist world, we've acknowledged this. We live in a world where money talks, things should not always have a value, but they do have a value. But yeah, anyone on the panel can answer this. So do you think that these problems, as much as we acknowledge it's a global thing, it really is just a problem for wealthier countries to address?
I'm happy to take the first one. Just biodiversity is global. It's not just in Australia. And the biodiversity crisis is global. The ALA, all of our data feeds into a bigger database called GBIF, the Global Biodiversity Information Facility, and it's sort of tracking that around. So when we think about others in other countries, completely understand that there's lots of other pressures that they're facing. End of the day though, this is a global challenge and we need global solutions. It's not going to be us here in a Western country telling them what to do in other countries, but we need them to also see that they're part of this system. And unfortunately, the impacts will disproportionately affect them. When you think about the changes that are going to occur, the first places that famines are going to occur is going to be developing countries. So it is relevant to them. And the more people we can have thinking about this, standing up saying, this is a problem, we want people to do something about it, the more chance we have to have the sort of global change that we need to see.
Oh, sorry.
Go for two, Leanne.
I was just going to add to that as well. I think that on the layer of that, or the lens of that, is that from a capitalist perspective, most of the impact is coming from the global north and Western countries like Australia. So not only are we creating the impact in us and all of our kind of, other really rich, wealthy nations, and we have with that a responsibility. So if we have an opportunity to show leadership in any way whatsoever and be a support, we know even within Australia, we look at the impacts on our like the Pacific Islands all around us, our neighbours, our immediate neighbours in the region where we live, we're having an impact right now. So even if those countries are not in the same political space to be able to do something to actually take the action, the fact that we have, been, disproportionately responsible for creating the impacts, then we also have a responsibility to show leadership in that respect as well.
Oh, Padma. Okay, very quickly, Padma, because I'm being told time is up. Although I could sit here for hours, honestly.
There are two issues. One is that I've just come back from Solomon Islands, and they are taking charge of their own destiny. So I think the agents of change it's actually happening in those countries. It's really us trying to support them to find a voice. So if you listen to follow the debate that's going on in the COP30, you know that they are standing up to speak. So I think it is happening. It's not something that we are trying to tell them. They're on the front line. And they are speaking up. So both on the context of biodiversity as well as on the climate change impact, they are realizing it. It's really for us to create the enabling environment to support them to become the agents of change. So when we were talking about what can we do, we're really not talking about telling them, but we want to empower them to be able to act. Yes. So agents of change is what we're really wanting to empower them with. So I think coming back to I've got grandchildren and trying to convince them why we should leave the country, the world a better place, they have to do it. We can't do it for them.
Yeah, which brings us to intergenerational equity. Okay,
Just to
Victoria,
flag, yeah.
super fast.
Yeah. So
It's just us.
the crazy thing is like where there are more carbon projects where there's been like a bit of taking advantage of the people is back in our countries, because there's just like, again, that sounds bad, but like the supremacy of, oh, okay, we're gonna come here from Europe or whatever state and do this project here. And then that there has been a lot of bad reputation again for carbon projects because that is happening there. Yeah. So it's also our role as carbon and environment companies to do things right. And there is mainly voluntary markets that are different for acute credit that, to be honest, is very strong and very method based. So in voluntary markets, sometimes there's, like it's nice because it's voluntary, but then there's a lot of space to, not have like the specific measurement to do certain kind of things. So it's just to bring awareness also that we as countries that have some more power, we should be also overseeing those countries that,
Yeah, I think that's right. Just to speak to Padma's and your point, Victoria, it's not just the mobilization of capital, it's the mobilization of infrastructure, resources, thought leadership, having those diversity of thinkers at the table at the right place, at the right time, having the right conversations to mobilize and incentivize and assist where we have a responsibility to assist. So on that note, we're going to close our panel. Sorry for running over so much. I'm getting lots of actions from everywhere. But can you please join me in thanking our panel today? It's been a fantastic discussion. And it's been a really critical conversation to have. So thank you very much for your time and your thoughts around this subject. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone. I just have 2 quick slides to go through. Don't go yet. We encourage everyone to please contribute to our pledge tree that is situated in the RA room. We have lots of little native animals that you can take. Please, it can be anything small or big that you want to commit to take action on when you leave this event, when we leave AlterCOP. Just write it on one of these little piece of native animal and put it in our tree. This is our art piece for AlterCOP 30 Australia. We'd like also to encourage you to scan this QR code and fill this quick survey. This is not only to improve future AlterCOP events, this also serves as a citizen's pulse for this entire event. We'll be writing an impact report, including all the pledges that you will put in the tree, but also the input that you are writing in this feedback form. So thank you very much. We are back in less than 50 minutes for our evening session with a special screening of the documentary Nature, The Call for Reconciliation by Yann Arthus-Bertrand. We still have tickets if you would like to stay and join. Please go to the registration desk. Thank you again. If you want to join me to thank again our speakers and wonderful panelists for today. Thank you.